Hello everyone and welcome to Power Skills Training. Power skills are the most important skills, especially in the AI era where being human and excelling at being human is more important than ever. We're talking about 4 power skills: self-mastery, ability to think, manage emotions, and self-efficacy or managing your time and tasks. And right now we are discussing self-mastery, and we did start with some philosophical exploration of what is the self and what is self-mastery throughout cultures. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of every now and then stepping back from our immediate reality, which usually requires very shallow thinking from us and conformity with public opinion, to step back and start exploring those ideas from a broader philosophical perspective. That in itself is training your thinking skill. We're going to talk about it in level 2. But right now, let's go back to self-mastery. So we did explore the concept of the self and self-mastery, and then we discussed sleep and self-mastery. Why is sleep and calm so important for self-mastery? There you had a challenge, an exploration and research task where you had to do a protocol before going to bed and after going to bed, but also do a research on your own on the importance of sleep, calm, and rest for self-mastery. Now, let's again examine what is self-mastery in its essence. Self-mastery is your ability to direct your attention and energy towards a meaningful goal, and sometimes that might feel unpleasant or there might be certain barrier to starting action. Sleep and rest is very important because, as we discussed, willpower is the engine of self-mastery. Willpower in itself is like a muscle. Over time, you can absolutely develop more willpower. However, when we talk about the 24 hours cycle, willpower throughout the day is a limited resource. So if you wake up and you're not rested enough, you have not had enough deep sleep, and you have not slept in the best windows for your brain to recover, you are going to have less willpower. Before we start talking about self-mastery, before we start becoming heroes and truly mastering the force, which is our attention and energy, we need to make sure we are rested. Yes, we have slept well and we are rested. If we are not rested, this means that our battery is low. So think of it like this. Self-mastery is going from where you are towards your dream, and you're doing this with a Tesla or with an electric car. This electric car has a battery. Now you're here and you're about to go towards your dream. If your battery is half full, you'll go halfway. If your battery is 1/3 full, you'll go 1/3. And so many people live in sleep and rest deprivation that it's absolutely impossible for them to develop discipline. I cannot stress enough the importance of sleep and calm for discipline and self-mastery. This is why I left this as a self-exploration task, because I believe it's very important for you to examine this in your own experience, but also to start learning about this on your own. Today, we're going to talk about dopamine and self-mastery, or in other words, motivation and self-mastery. Dopamine is known as the motivational neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters are chemicals in our brain which act as messenger, and dopamine is the messenger which says, this is important, do it again. Although some people believe that dopamine is all about reward, actually dopamine is about motivation. And interestingly enough, dopamine is released more in anticipation to a reward or to a task than after the reward or the task. Now, this is a very fascinating topic, and I believe every human being needs to study dopamine, its effect, and how it works for self-mastery, for discipline, and for motivation. This is why in this video I'm only going to outline some of the most important principles about dopamine. Then I will link some resources, and again I will invite you to do more research on your own. And I cannot stress enough the importance of doing research on your own for self-mastery. Self-mastery is not listening to another person giving you ready information. Self-mastery is going out there on your own, digging information, evaluating whether this information is meaningful or not, and making conclusions for yourself. So, dopamine is our motivational battery. It's a neurotransmitter, a chemical which sends message in our brain. Let's explore what are the most important topics or principles or points that we need to know about dopamine when it comes to self-mastery. Okay, so when we talk about dopamine, we need to understand that dopamine, it's not something that's like a flat line. We have dopamine spikes and then we go back to baseline. Something really interesting happens when we have a very high spike, then we get a very low point here, and then we return to baseline. Now, baseline dopamine, which you also have some information about that in the resources, baseline dopamine, it's like motivational battery. Something very interesting happens to baseline dopamine. It can get depleted. The way dopamine baseline gets depleted, and it's when it has too many spikes or too high of spikes. And this usually happens through social media, through video gaming, through watching series with novelty, and of course, through dating apps. Pretty much dopamine works when we sense something that's going to be novel or pleasurable, and all social media, dating apps, and games are designed to give you dopamine spikes. Now, in the short term, this feels good. In the long term, though, this depletes our baseline dopamine or our battery. Exactly. When we choose to use our time for social media or for video games excessively, we are depleting our motivational battery. So the first principle that I want you to understand is the fact that through really often dopamine spikes, you deplete your baseline dopamine and your dopamine battery. When we speak about dopamine, it's very important to look at starting action. There are two big challenges when we speak about discipline and self-mastery: starting action and sustaining action. So how do you start action? Usually when you're about to start to study, practice a skill, work out, look for a job, call your clients, work on your business, whatever it is that has high stakes and requires mental, emotional, and physical energy, there is, as Dr. Huberman calls it, limbic friction. The limbic system in your brain, which is very ancient and it's all about emotions, senses friction. Why? Well, because you're about to do something that requires effort, that requires energy. So there is some friction in starting action. This is why we have the starting protocol in Catapult Your Career courses, because the starting protocol allows you to lower the limbic friction so that you can start action. In terms of dopamine, there is something else that matters a lot when we speak about starting action. So when we speak about starting action, the most important thing is to consider your task with the smallest possible thing. So let's say that you have to write a master thesis or a big paper. Your goal should not be to write the entire thing, not even half of the thing, not even 10 pages. Your goal in starting should be to write one sentence. Exactly. Starting action is best when our brain sees that there is no high limbic friction. So, if you're starting to write your entire work, friction is this high. If you're starting to write half of your work, friction is this high. If you consider starting to write just one sentence, opening the computer, opening the document and writing one sentence, your friction is here and your readiness to start action is here. So you start action. In starting action, the most important thing is to aim for something small, to tell yourself and to tell your brain that right now you're opening this document and you're going to write just one sentence. Let me give you another example to make this even clearer. If your goal is to work out, starting doesn't mean you're going to work out for an hour or 15 minutes. Starting means that you're actually going to go on the treadmill, turn it on, and start walking or running. or that you engage in your first exercise. Exactly. The best strategy for starting action is to think of the smallest possible thing you can do today. Sustaining action is another great challenge when we talk about self-mastery and discipline. And the way to sustain challenge is to break the big task in micro goals. As we discussed in Map Your Success training, when there is a huge gap between where you are and where you want to be, you get discouraged and your brain gets discouraged too. So, in order to sustain action, break your tasks into micro goals and celebrate each win. Sometimes it's really hard to see how we progress when we compare our progress to the big goal. So let's say that your goal is to learn to code in whatever coding language. This requires steps, micro steps, and micro goals. So if you're measuring your progress in terms of, am I able to fully code this complex app? Probably you're far away from that goal. But if you measure your progress towards a micro goal, which is, did I complete coding lesson number 1? Check, that's better. Dopamine is all about getting some sort of reward or tap on the shoulder for completing a small goal. Now, of course, if it's way too small or if you haven't completed it, it won't work. This is why the best tip for sustaining action is to break big goals into smaller ones and celebrate each micro win. Let's look at some strategies to improve dopamine. As we discussed, dopamine baseline gets depleted by pretty much a lot of the activities that we have in modern life. Something that you can do which will both help you improve your dopamine baseline and in itself is a training camp for self-mastery is to do a social media detox. Exactly. Digital detox light is what will help your baseline dopamine, but it's also a training for your discipline. Another strategy in using dopamine to be disciplined and improve dopamine is action before emotions. A lot of people, although they know in theory that they should not wait for inspiration and motivation, somehow wait until they feel like doing the task. Sometimes the feeling never comes. This is actually opposite of how things work in our brain. We get the feeling once we start action. A lot of people who work out share that before starting the workout, they really don't feel like working out. But in the process of working out and afterwards, they feel amazing. This is why start with something small, break your big goal into micro goals, and expect the emotion after you start action. So never wait to feel good, to feel inspired, or to feel motivated. On the contrary, make up your mind that you're going to start action in order to feel inspired, in order to feel motivated. So you're not looking for motivation or inspiration to come. You're starting action, and this is how motivation and inspiration comes to you. Another strategy to use dopamine in your favor and to sustain discipline is to gamify your work. In a way, Catapult Your Career Scorecard is a form of gamification. So how can you gamify your work? Well, first of all, use a chunking technique like Pomodoro, which is described in detail in your workbook. What does that mean? Break your cycles, break your working period into small cycles. So 25 minutes work, 5-minute rest. 25 minutes work, 5-minute rest. By doing this cycle, you are not depleting dopamine by using too much energy and too much motivation muscle in order to work. You work and you rest, you work and you rest. So in gamifying work, first use time intervals of work and rest. Now, something important, in your rest intervals, don't use social media. In your rest intervals, as much as possible, stay away from devices, take a nice cup of coffee, a nice cup of tea, read a book that's interesting to you, or watch a video that's interesting to you, but try to stay away from scrolling, liking, and looking at your likes, because this is actually not going to work well. In gamifying work, the first thing is rhythm. Work, relax, work, relax. The second thing is come up with some rewards. Exactly. So you have broken down your big goal into micro goals. The next step is to come up with some rewards, but not for accomplishing each micro goal, because then this won't work. For some milestones. So every 3 strikes that you have, every 3 times you reach a micro goal, give yourself a reward. However, here I'm going to give you a very important key, and that's the intermittent reward schedule. Research has shown that when you expect a reward after certain action, you get bored very easily and dopamine stops working. And this is exactly what most casinos and gambling apps use to keep their users hooked. You don't get a reward every time. You cannot predict when you're getting the reward, and that novelty in yourself is motivating. So you have a goal, you have broken it down to micro goals, then you have milestones which you've gamified, and you're going to give yourself a reward for each milestone. But every now and then, don't give yourself the reward. So let's say that your goal is to submit 20 resumes for your dream position. For each resume that you submit, that's a micro goal. For each 5 resumes that you submit, that's a milestone. So the first 5 resumes that you submit, give yourself a reward. The second 5 resumes that you submit, don't give yourself a reward. And this is how you gamify work. And lastly, but not least important, make sure that you reset your dopamine. And this links back to our previous video. How do you reset your battery? By sleeping and by resting, by ensuring that you have enough sleep and enough good quality sleep, but also by ensuring that you are rested. So I hope this has informed you on how you can start and sustain action towards your goals, towards important and meaningful things in your life. And I have listed a series of resources on dopamine below, and I do hope that you are going to explore the topic even more. And before I leave you, please don't forget the challenge in your workbook. I invite you to do the challenge, as this is absolutely going to level up your game when it comes to self-mastery.